Hi, welcome to another edition of This Issue. My guest this time is Fred Horch, who's a local sustainable goods shopkeeper in downtown Brunswick, and is also the Green Independent candidate for the State House District 66 seat in Brunswick. Welcome to the show.
Great, thank you, Bruce.
Good to have you here.
Great to be here.
Your store in, as I say, downtown Brunswick is called what?
Well, it's F.W. Horch, Sustainable Goods and Supplies, and we're right at 56 Main Street in Brunswick.
And what is the focus of your store?
So we're here to help people save the planet. Our mission is to inspire, encourage, and equip you to help save the planet, and we do all sorts of things from solar panels to composting toilets to everyday things like water bottles. We just try to think, what are things you can do in your own personal life to make a difference?
And why did you open up that store, Fred?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I started out, I went to law school, actually was a corporate attorney for a while, and had a chance to think about what I'd really like to do with my life. Was successful in an internet company. And I looked at all the issues and all the problems that are facing the world, and really looked at sort of what's underlying some of what are the basic problems that we really need to address. And the environment really struck me as something that's fundamental, whether it really is beyond politics, it's something that's just fundamental to every person. And so I initially started in the nonprofit sector and worked here in Maine, actually for Maine Interfaith Power and Light, helping people buy green electricity. But one of the things I found is that you can tell people what to do, you can help educate people, but actually getting people to do things in their lives was difficult. And as a nonprofit, you really aren't really selling a product, you're just encouraging people to do things. I want to take the next step. So that led me to connect up with the folks who were running the Green Store in Belfast, and actually they've been doing it for a decade. I really admire what they were doing, and I really like the idea of getting these products into people's hands so you could really change somebody's behavior, because in the end that's what it's all about. You can say the right thing, but if you don't do the right thing, you're still part of the problem. And so that's what led me to eventually having my own store. I was an owner of the Green Store for a couple of years, and then launched F.W. Horch in 2006.
And in 2006, so you've had the store for 4 years.
Right, we've hung in there. People are always asking, how's it going? And you know, it's tough. As a small business owner in Maine, especially recently on Main Street, a lot of people have gone out of business on Main Street. I feel like sort of like the last guy standing in some ways. I mean, there are people that have been there longer than me, but 4 years is a good long time. And so we have great customers that really keep us in business. But every day I wake up thinking, how am I going to pay the bills? You know, how am I going to meet payroll? How am I going to keep this business going, and it's really the customers that make it worthwhile.
Now, as part of your store, you've been, over a period of a couple of years, I know, been organizing little talks and meetings, or workshops almost, inside the store. Tell us about those.
Again, our mission is to inspire, encourage, and equip, so we really want to help get the word out about what you can do. So for example, composting, we want to help people understand what that is and help them think about doing it, so even before they buy a product. So this actually was something we did at the Green Store before F.W. Horch even started. So I've been doing this for 5, 6 years now. Every month we decided it'd be great to invite an expert into the store to give a free workshop on something that they're an expert on. So we've done solar panels, we've done composting, we've done some upcoming ones we have. Al Heath just retrofitted a house in Bath. So he took an old house and he made it super energy efficient, something that's really important for Maine. So he'll be coming to the store and telling people what he did and helping people understand how to do it in their own lives. So these are things that we advertise in the paper. We again, bring an expert in every month. It's free, and it's just a fabulous way to learn something. It's a great networking opportunity. Sometimes we have 6 people, sometimes we have 60 people there, but we've done it every month since the store's been open.
That's great. I think it's a great community service that you've offered. I've recently heard you talking about some of the key issues or concerns that you have, and wanted to hear more about your ideas. I know you're organizing some upcoming community candidate forums in September about some of these local issues, where you're inviting the other candidates in your race to come and join you, and I understand that you've had them say that they're going to come to at least some of those forums.
Right, yeah. So I'm a clean elections candidate, which means I've gotten money from the state, and I thought, what's the best way to use that money? I've had education, really want to help people, you know, meet their candidates, find out where they stand, and then learn about the issues. So we're having a series of issue forums These are issues that I think are really important to the future of Maine. And the first ones, we're having 3 of them, and each one is focused on a particular set of issues.
Okay, well, let's talk about them one at a time.
Great.
The first one, because I think the meat here I want to really get at is your ideas around some of these things, because I think your thinking is really solid.
Thank you.
The first one is food and energy. You're going to be talking about that. It's going to be on Tuesday, September 7th at the Frontier Cafe in Brunswick at 7 o'clock.
Yep.
Now, some people are predicting economic collapse here in America. And the question is, how are we going to feed our families and heat our homes at this time of really extreme difficulty in the future? Would you comment on that?
Well, there is a great tradition of predicting economic collapse. You can go all the way back to Malthus in the 1800s. How are we going to feed ourselves? It is an issue. I mean, it's fundamental to our security. How do you feed your family? It's your number one responsibility as a parent. How do you feed your kids? So, and it is, we're at a difficult position right now. Maine is at the end of a lot of transportation and delivery systems. So we're at the far end of the interstate highway system, for example. So you think about California produce coming all the way across the country to Maine. If the price of oil were to double or triple or quadruple or who knows what it goes to, maybe the trucks won't make it all the way to Maine. So food is really an important issue. Energy is right along with it. And it's an issue for me because I believe my concern is sustainability. And sustainability in my definition is enjoying your life in a way that allows your children and grandchildren to enjoy their lives. So for example, if you plant a garden and you enrich your soil and you die, your children can enjoy that garden. But if you spend all your money going to the supermarket and they're burning fossil fuel to get the produce there, when you die, your kids may have nothing. I mean, really, how you grow your food affects future generations. It's not, your legacy is not just money. So for Maine, the question is, how do we encourage more people who want to farm to be able to farm as a profession, make money? How do we ensure that we have a reliable food system so that looking forward, it's not hard to predict that the price of oil is going to go up, and that will affect the price of food. So how do we help people continue to afford healthy diets? How do we make that transition?
So what are some of the ways we do those things?
So very important, there's a saying, no farms, no food. That's fundamental. We've got to figure out how to preserve farmland, how to get it working. A lot of people don't realize that it takes effort to build soil. In this country, my grandfather is from Canada. He grew up on a farm in Canada, came down to work in the factory. It's a typical, life history that you grew up with this real knowledge of how food is grown. In school, you learned how to write, but at home, you learned all about how to feed yourself. Well, in today's society, people don't even know the first clue about where food. Too many people really don't know enough about it. So we really have to focus on encouraging people to farm, to keep those farms in production so that if we need them, they'll be there. It's not something that you can just flip a switch and suddenly you have a bunch of farms. It's really something that requires some forethought and planning in advance. So for food, I really want to focus on local farmers. And there's a lot of great farmers in Brunswick, but there's a lot of state policies that we need to change to support local farmers and make sure that people have a healthier diet and can get local fresh food. It really shouldn't be as expensive as it is for people to eat well. And that's our problem is if you're just economically rational, you can go to the grocery store and buy cheap calories that make you sick for less money than healthy food.
What about energy? How are we going to heat our homes?
Yep.
How are we going to afford to do that?
Yep. So, in Maine, we have a heating climate, right? So you will die in the winter if you don't keep your house warm. So we have to heat our homes. And the energy we're using right now, we don't produce any of it in Maine. We're importing petroleum. This puts a tremendous burden on our economy because it's basically a tax. We send a ton of money out of Maine every year to pay for petroleum, and that puts us under the gun to produce something here in Maine that we can trade for that petroleum we're bringing in. It's completely unnecessary. We have more than enough energy here in Maine. We've got great solar resource, we've got great hydro resource, we've got great wood resource. So it's really a question of political will, the right policies in place to become self-reliant. So wind is getting a lot of play. It's certainly it's something where you can make a lot of money if you're a big corporation investing in wind. The problem with wind is that it occurs in a couple locations and it's not available on an equal basis to everybody throughout Maine. So along ridge tops and offshore where the wind resource is, I feel like we're putting too much emphasis on wind. If you look at, it's an intermittent resource, meaning it doesn't happen all the time. You can't count on the wind all the time. And it's got a lot of drawbacks. On the other hand, solar, and I'll give you a specific policy problem we have. If you put a solar panel on your roof right now and you generate electricity, and you don't use all the electricity, if you're generating more than you need, that electricity goes and helps your neighbors. So basically, it's a great thing to do to put a solar electric panel on your house. It helps improve the reliability of the grid. You help offsetting other ways of generating electricity. So it's a great thing. We should be encouraging it, but we don't. If you won't be paid for the extra energy you produce. You can get your bill down to zero, but if you produce more energy than you use, and you're basically it goes into the grid and helps your neighbors power their homes, you don't get paid for a dime. I mean, you're basically, we're discouraging people from putting solar on their homes.
That's a state policy?
That's a state policy, very easy to fix, which would mean pay people for the energy they produce. If you're willing to install solar on your house, we should pay you. In fact, we should be encouraging you, but we should start by at least paying you to generate electricity cleanly, reliably, and ultimately affordably. Because once you install,
isn't that done in other states?
The United States has a real problem with this. Other countries have done a better job. There are other incentive programs throughout the country. Maine has what's called a net metering law, and we have a net zero law, meaning you can, again, bring your bill to zero, but you don't get paid for all the energy you produce. And the reason it's a complicated reason, but it's just a political decision, and it really shouldn't be that way. So we already have all the infrastructure in place. We just need to lift the cap, let people get paid for all the energy they produce. It shouldn't, it should benefit the homeowner who makes that decision and makes that investment.
Let's move to the second forum that you're organizing.
Yeah.
Excuse me. It's called BASE and Public the BASE Redevelopment and Public Transportation.
Yep.
It's going to be held on Monday, September 13th at the Curtis Memorial Library in Brunswick at 7 p.m.
Yep.
How do you think the plans are going right now for the BASE redevelopment?
Well, I have real concerns about how the base is being redeveloped. I think everybody does. If you have a business in Brunswick, it's certainly top of mind. How is the base redevelopment going to occur? What kind of businesses are we favoring? One of the big issues for me is the transportation plan. So one of the thoughts right now is to have a community college on the base. And it makes a big difference whether you have facilities for people to stay, have a residential system, or whether it's all commuting. And if it is commuting, where do you think the people are going to come from? Or can they come by train or bus, for example? Does everybody have to drive? So it needs to be carefully thought out. And I'm not sure that I would like to really think about sustainability and the long-term viability of these businesses. As you probably know, and most of the viewers probably know, there's now a plan. I mean, we have this enormous runway. They was spent at, the federal government came in and built this enormous runway in the middle of Brunswick, Maine. It's sort of not close to anything. It's really difficult to figure out an economically viable use for that gigantic runway. But it's very attractive. You're thinking, boy, this is a really impressive asset. How can we leverage it? I think that's diverting us from the real issue, the real sustainable future for Maine, which is small business. How many small businesses need a $1 billion runway? Very, very few of them. But how many businesses need a place to set up shop, some land? I mean, the things that the base has to offer small business are enormous. We have an enormous potential there, and I think we're not really capturing the potential for small businesses. My thought is we need to do more on the business incubation side, the community college, and tying it to the other ideas I have, energy and food. It'd be great to have a community college with a horticultural focus. We have land there. We could help people learn how to become farmers. We could have tie-ins to small businesses that spin off of things that are actually made in Maine. And made in Maine, not just in a place that has a $1 billion runway, but made in Maine everywhere. So my thought is let's focus on other kinds of businesses that can get their start on the base and then can go to other places in Maine and help support the economy. I think we're focusing too much on how can we bring a big business in from out of state to capitalize on that runway and make a little bit of money. But in reality, what we need to do is we need to spread out some of our capital so that small business people with good ideas can get started, and then small businesses that have started and need a little bit of capital to make it to market get supported. So I'm really in favor of the small business incubation idea of having a community college, some education, some retraining for people who have lost their jobs and need to be retrained, and some capital formation for people who need access to capital to start their businesses, and a support system And I've lived in other parts of the country. North Carolina did this. The Triangle has a great incubator, and Silicon Valley and Boston. So there's a lot of these places that have started, and you think now they're like, internationally known, but they weren't always that way. If you go back to Silicon Valley, what they were growing, I think they were growing plums or something there. So Brunswick, Maine could be on the map. It could be a really important economic driver for Maine, but we've got to think carefully about how we're doing it. And small business, I'm a small business owner, so maybe that's my bias, but I really think small business is the way to go, and I don't see enough emphasis there on small business.
Now the Amtrak is going to come from Portland
Right.
to Brunswick.
Yep.
How do you feel about that?
It's great.
And is it enough?
It's fantastic, and we need more. I mean, so is it enough? It's necessary but not sufficient.
What's the next step?
Well, I think even before Amtrak, in general, public transportation, I would like to see more people coming to Brunswick, but without a car. Brunswick I was on a website the other day that was ranking communities in terms of how walkable they were, and Brunswick was a walker's paradise. It was one of the best communities in the entire country in terms of walkability. So if you can get to downtown Brunswick and walk, it's great. So that's where we need to put our emphasis. We're starting a bus service, which is great. I also think we need to help people get to their jobs. And so, a twice-a-day Amtrak thing down to Portland is a good start, but, there are a lot of people that work at Beans, for example. They live in Brunswick, they work at LL Bean, and a little shuttle between Freeport and Brunswick would be great. There's 3.5 million people come to Freeport to shop. It's the #1 tourist destination in Maine. And a little bit of emphasis in getting people to, hop on a shuttle, maybe a little trolley system that uses the track to get people from Freeport up to Brunswick. So I love the idea of Amtrak. I think we should do a lot more with public transportation. And it has a lot of benefits to our economy, because if we can bring people to Brunswick on foot, they can walk around, they can shop at stores like mine, they can go to, there's a lot to do in Brunswick, but we really don't need all those extra cars. So how to get people here without their cars, I think, is a real challenge.
It used to be in Maine, there was a rail system connecting practically every corner of the state.
Right, yep.
Isn't that the vision we need to be working towards?
Yeah, it was intentionally dismantled. The thought was, rather than have trolleys, we'll make people buy cars. That will be good for car dealerships, it'll be good for car manufacturers, it'll be good for the oil companies. That whole system has run its course. It was great. GM was a great company, but GM went bankrupt, and our country is on its way towards being bankrupt. So now we've got to rethink our transportation system, forcing people to buy cars. A lot of people don't realize it, but it's about 60 cents a mile to drive a private car. So if you go between Brunswick and Portland, what's that, 20 miles? It's a phenomenal amount of money to drive if you're thinking about how much it costs per mile to drive a car. It's a tremendous part of people's budget. And as we mentioned before, none of the gasoline is produced by Maine companies. So all the money you spend on gasoline it's like a tax taken right out of the state. If we did a trolley system, it's very easy to figure out how to electrify that. We can make electricity in Maine. You'd support a Maine company. We could make the trolleys on the base if we put our minds to it. So rethinking how we do our transportation. Plus, we also know that walking and bicycling is good for your health. And so if we can just focus a way to build our infrastructure so that we support the cost-effective approaches that are going to be cost-effective and affordable in the long run. We're in a very unaffordable and unsustainable trajectory in transportation right now, and it's all tied to economic development as well. Where we build the roads, what kind of businesses we bring in, what kind of services and goods they're providing. We've really got to think about these. It's all connected, and it's important to think this through.
And all of that, making these changes to public transportation, help solve for climate change as well.
Yeah. Now, in my business, some people believe in climate change and some people don't. And it's hard for me to say, is climate change happening or not? But I think everybody understands that we don't produce gasoline in Maine. And everybody understands that if you buy gasoline, you spend your money on burning a gallon of gasoline, at the end of the day, we have one less gallon of gasoline to burn, and your kids are going to have a dirtier planet.
So you're saying you're not sure about climate change?
I personally believe it, but it's one of these things, it's almost like a religion. I can line up all my evidence, and somebody can line up all his evidence, and we can argue about it all day long, and it does nobody any good. I like to get to the practical solutions. So I don't really like to have this climate change argument. I think it's, if you believe it like I do, I structure my life around it, but if you don't believe it, I'm not going to force you. I don't think the carbon trading market's a good idea. I think if we want to tax carbon, let's just be honest about it and tax carbon, you know.
Okay.
So that's how I come down on it.
Thanks.
Sure.
The third forum that you're organizing is Health and Education.
Right.
It's going to be held on Wednesday, September 15th, again at the Curtis Memorial Library in Brunswick at 7 p.m. Tell us about that Health and Education Forum.
Yeah, well, again, I think these are fundamental issues. You know, health is important to everybody. If you don't have your health, you don't have anything. And so the idea behind these forums is to really have people have a chance to talk about the issues. So this has been a very interesting year for health because we have some federal rules coming in that are going to change the debate. We have a disastrous state program, which was well-intentioned but really never worked the way it was intended. But as a small business owner, I can tell you, providing health insurance is critical to small business. I have trouble hiring people because they can work for a big corporation and get health insurance. I have trouble providing health insurance. I think we're underinvesting in preventing problems. So we spend a lot of money on trying to cure cancer once it happens, but we don't spend nearly enough in preventing people from getting cancer in the first place. And all this is public policy choices. So we need to have this discussion, and so this is an opportunity. And it's really, again, all these things are so tied together. You can't really separate healthcare from economic performance because it's taking up a larger and larger section. I think more people work in the healthcare field than any other field in Maine. So people talk about tourism being a big industry and fishing being a big industry and forestry. Well, healthcare is a huge industry in Maine, and it's becoming a bigger and bigger industry.
Because we're a sick society.
Because we're a sick society, we're an aging population, but some of the problems that we're encountering, for example, look at our transportation. Almost none of our children walk to school. Almost all of our children don't get enough exercise. So you could solve some exercise, solve some health issues by how kids get to school. So, but again, this is all about prevention. Rather than treating diabetes once a kid's obese, let's figure out a way to keep the kid from getting obese. And if he's got no opportunity to exercise, it's really hard not to gain weight. So we got to think about this stuff.
Speaking of kids,
yeah.
How many do you have?
So I have 3 kids, and I'm delighted that they'll all be at the same school for the only time in their lives. So we have a kid entering kindergarten, my youngest. So they'll all be at the same public school in Brunswick, and it'll be great. And luckily, in Brunswick we can walk and bike to school. So again, sort of tying healthcare and education together, I feel that it's just so important to our future. It's so important to think carefully about how we structure our healthcare, that we're covering our kids, that every kid has health insurance. I really would like to see that a priority. There's a lot of talk about it, but I don't think it'd be that hard to achieve. And then talking about education, having 3 kids in public school, I've been very impressed. The people in the public schools in Brunswick are top-notch, fabulous schools. I can't say enough good things about them. But we have a funding issue. We have really got to figure out the state's promising a certain amount of money and then not delivering it. And it makes it very difficult to plan. And so the question is can we afford not to have an excellent education? I feel like it is an expensive investment, but it is something that we really can't avoid making. We really need an excellent educational system. It's important to our future. It's the right thing to do for our kids. We have to spend the money wisely, but I think we have a good place to start in Maine with public education.
What kind of things do you think we need to do to make public education better?
Well, we have an emphasis on testing, and these tests are driven by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I mean, that's the No Child Left Behind, really is sort of these echoes and repercussions from really unequal situations in other part of the country. And they've sort of become a national issue, and how to make sure everybody gets the same shot. In Maine, we don't quite have the same issues that the rest of the country has, and I think some of the testing is absurd. It's like the joke about a drunk looking for his keys under a street lamp, and you ask him, did you drop your keys there? He said, no, but the light's better over here. We measure things that are easy to test. Is that important for kids to know? Maybe not, but we can standardize the test, and we can tell, okay, everybody's the same. And so we're testing. The tests are designed to make the test takers and the test, it's just a way to measure things without really thinking about what we're measuring and why. What's really important in education is, are the kids who are educating, are they going to be able to grow up and have the kind of society that we want them to have? Are they going to be able to become the business leaders and and the political leaders, and are they going to be able to have the kind of life that we want them to have? And so some of the skills that they need, they're not getting in school. They're having to take these tests which is taking up time away from the things they really need. So for example, getting along and being able to resolve conflict is a really important skill. That's just something we really need to teach in schools. How do you standardize that and test it? How do you tell if somebody's a bully or not on a standardized test? So those are things that the schools are doing despite the pressure we're pushing on them to test everything. And I think that we need to really look carefully at what are we testing and why. Some testing is good, but I think we've gone overboard. We're doing too much testing at the expense of things that are more important. For example, how to get along. And I mentioned earlier how to grow food. I think every school should have a school garden. You know, in my store, we're bringing in worm bins so kids can learn how to compost. And that's really hard to standardize a test. Do you know how to grow a garden? But it's a really easy thing to if you want to evaluate, how's your school garden doing? Is it producing food or not? So there are some ways to assess whether the schools are being successful without doing the standardized testing.
Let me ask you another question. Getting back to the base, the redevelopment of the base, there was some talk early on that they might be making drones there. And recently the guy that they've found to come and build aircraft there, he formerly was working at a company that was building drones. And I saw an interview with him recently in the Forecaster where he said he'd be happy to make drones.
Right.
Do you think there's a possibility that these drones that are being used in Afghanistan and Pakistan, not only for surveillance but also for firing missiles and actually killing civilians frequently, do you think drones are going to be built at Brunswick?
I don't know. I have a meeting, scheduling a meeting with Steve Levesque, who's in charge of the Mid-Coast Regional Redevelopment Authority, and so I have issues. I have concerns about that, and so I'll talk to Steve and find out, what the plans are. Certainly, listen to somebody like John Richardson, who was, running for governor here in Brunswick, and I think he sort of gave the conventional wisdom there, sort of the powers that be, is like, sure, if we can make some money on this, sure, we'll do it. So I don't see why anybody would rule that out. If their business as usual happens, then I don't see why they would rule out drones. Personally, I think it's the wrong thing, and I think we need to be making products and providing services that are beneficial to Mainers, and I'm not sure drones are really the best use of our public money.
Well, Fred, we have just a minute or so left. Do you want to make kind of a closing statement to the listeners?
Sure. Well, really appreciate the time this morning. Thank you very much. I really admire the work you do. And, again, I mentioned sustainability. That's what drives me, the idea that we need to figure out ways to enjoy our lives in a way that other people can enjoy theirs, and really thinking about the future. So my hope is that everybody can think about what they can do in their own lives, that they can make changes, that they concern themselves with the common good. And I think it's just really easy in our society to become apathetic and sort of look the other way. But there really are issues out there that you can do something about, whether it's just making a change in how you throw away your garbage, to getting involved in the political process. And certainly I would encourage folks, if they want to become an informed voter, come to the forums and meet your candidates. Think about the issues and don't give up. There are a lot of problems. Climate change seems so huge, and we've got 2 wars going on, as you well know. So don't give up hope. All
right. Well, Fred, thank you for coming on the show. We appreciate it.
Great.
And thank you for watching another edition of This Issue. Until next time, good luck to you all, and please get organized.